The reality we live in can be a very strange place. Most of the time, fact being stranger than fiction. How will we ever start to understand this reality we live in unless we question everything? Join me and a guest as we unravel the mysteries of this reality, one topic at a time. This is Inquiries of Our Reality with Shayn Jones.
Reality isn't what it seems. Abductees taking aboard a craft with a tractor beam. Is life a simulation or an astral dream? Aliens travel through black holes in different galaxies. Life is a bizarre odyssey with a mic talking about philosophy. Well, Bigfoot is stalking campers as a Wendigo walks through the woods of sharpened antlers, using a Ouija board to talk to the dead like a necromancer. There's so many questions and not enough answers. So if you're interested in mysteries and abnormalities, tune in and listen to Inquiries of Our Reality. So if you're interested in mysteries and abnormalities, tune in and listen to Inquiries of Our Reality.
What is up, Inquirers, and welcome to the expanse of deep, open-minded conversation. I'm the one they call Shane, and tonight for you guys, I have somebody that I've been wanting to get on the show for a very long time, and I was finally able to set it up. And he's one of those people that inspired me to dive into a lot of the stuff that I do in the cryptid community, watching a lot of his documentaries, reading a lot of his books before I even started the podcast. So tonight for you guys, I have the legendary Lyle Blackburn. And not only we dive into Sasquatch research, which is usually a lot of what he talks about, but we also dive into some more obscure stuff, such as his new book and what he's researching for that, and of course the reptilian phenomenon and the dogman phenomenon. But before we get into this fascinating conversation today, we of course have to do news and updates and front of house. As far as news and updates go, I'm at a crossroads trying to figure out which would be the best way to go about this. But as far as the Patreon goes, I would like to either create an additional show that's different from Bizarre Inquiries, that's mainly just a solo show with me. I've had a few ideas for it that I've tossed around as far as the Patreon members go, so I do have an idea for that, and that's definitely something doable. But the other side of it that I could definitely do, that it seems like a lot of you guys seem to enjoy as far as other podcasts and stuff go, are the extended conversations where, we can end the show and then we go on to the Patreon and we do maybe another half hour or so. But I want to figure out what you guys think is the best course of action, what you guys would like to hear the most. So let me know if you guys would like to hear another Patreon exclusive show, or if you guys would like to hear extended conversations with the regular episodes of the show. And leading into new front of house stuff, if anybody has encounters that they would like to report, you guys can report those to ommencounterreports@outlook.com. Doesn't matter how big, doesn't matter how small. I would definitely love to hear about them. And you guys can either, type them out, and you guys can send them to me through email or through the link tree. There is a specific submission form for that. Or you guys can even do it through social media. Or the other option is that you guys can record yourself, and you guys can send that to me through email. Preferably not over Instagram, because sometimes those don't let you replay them, and I'd love to be able to record them and play them on the show. But again, none of that will happen unless you guys report those encounters to ommencounterreports@outlook.com. And if you guys want to support the show, there's a couple of different ways to do so. One of the ways that I'm trying to push right now is if you guys don't mind leaving reviews or ratings for the show on iTunes or Spotify, I would definitely appreciate it. Boost up the show in the algorithms, and with that, I have more people coming in and wanting to share their encounters, share their research. So I'm trying to do it so that I can bring in some more awesome guests for you guys, but I won't be able to do that, of course, without your guys' help. So if you guys don't mind taking that extra 10, 15 seconds, if you guys think I deserve it, to leave that 5-star review, I will, of course, read on the show and give you guys a big shout out. And number 2, for supporting the show, you guys can go and join the Patreon. Over there, I have the $1 tier, the $3 tier, and the $5 tier. All of those, there's a 7-day free trial for them. So if you guys want to check them out and see what they're all about, a lot of new updates coming as far as Patreon goes, like I was mentioning in the beginning, trying to expand that and make it so there's more stuff that you guys want. And I know that most podcasts have a little bit of a down spike during summer, so I'm trying to make sure that I have all this stuff coming up for you guys as far as when fall hits, so you guys have a bunch of awesome stuff to listen to when you guys are stuck in the house when it starts getting a little bit colder out. And the third way you guys can support the show is through going and checking out the Open Minds Media merch store. Over there, it's not just podcast designs. What I've been focusing on lately is a bunch of cryptid, UFO, paranormal, conspiratorial, all those type of designs. There, of course, are the podcast logo designs, but that's not the focus of the store. I'm trying to build that up as a t-shirt company, so if you guys are interested in all that kind of weird stuff, don't forget to go and keep tabs on the Open Minds Media merch store. Anytime there is a new shirt drop, that will be posted on the Instagram and everything, of course, so make sure you guys keep your eyes out over there. And if you guys see anything that you guys would like to scoop for yourself, you guys can use code Cryptid10 at checkout for 10% off. And if you guys want to stay up to date on the show, including the Open Minds Media merch store, you guys can go and follow Inquiries of Our Reality and Open Minds Media on Instagram, Facebook, Discord, YouTube, and TikTok. And every single thing that I mentioned is all available in the link tree, which is available down in the show description. And with that, let's get into the show. Please welcome to the show the legendary Lyle Blackburn. How's it going today, man?
It's going good.
Absolute pleasure to have you on the show, man. Been doing the show for about 3 years or so now. Obviously, I've seen you around the community, and I used to watch in different documentaries and stuff like that before I even started up. So it's one of those things, man, that there's certain guests that I was really looking forward to having on the show, and you were definitely one of those people on that list. So
Awesome. Glad we could make it happen.
Oh, yeah, man. It's always cool who you get to meet at conventions because you never know who's going to end up being there. And it's always a great way to connect with people because, you know, I'm sure being somebody that probably gets bombarded with a bunch of messages from people asking you to come on the show, it's always better to get a face.
Yeah, it certainly helps. I mean, there's just so many shows now and things, you know, you can't do them all. So it's nice to do those events where you can, you know, meet face to face, you know, and meet people you may have, you know, talk to already or whatever. So I think those are great places for people like-minded to, you know, people with like-minded thoughts about this to meet up.
Dude, it's one of those places, man. I love going to events because you don't have to put a filter on because it seems like in certain places you kind of have to put the filter on because you go to the community and you say, oh, I'm going on a squatch hike and nobody looks at you where they're all like, oh, yeah, when are you going? Where are you going? But you're at normal work or something like that and you're like, oh, I'm going for a squatch hike. And everybody's like, wait, what?
Right. Explain.
So I guess a good spot to start for anybody that may not be familiar with you, I always like to do a little bit of the background and ask why people got into exactly what they do. So for anybody that may not be familiar with who you are, what you do, and what got you into it, why don't you fill them in a little bit?
Well, for me, as far back as I can remember, I gravitated towards horror movies and monsters, creature features and stuff like that. You know, any movie about werewolves or Frankenstein I loved. And when I was in third grade, they used to pass out this little thing and you could order books. And I ordered a book called Strange But True by Daniel Cohen. And it looked, you know, like, okay, this is about monsters or whatever. But that was the first time I was exposed to stories of Yeti, Bigfoot, and the Loch Ness Monster. And it had little short chapters on those. So now I'm thinking, wow, this is amazing. You know, people seeing, you know, like dinosaur-like things or hairy creatures in the woods. And I grew up hunting with my father. He's an avid bow hunter. So we were always hunting and camping, always in wooded environments and places like that. So, you know, that kind of added to that mystique, I guess, of seeing monsters in the woods. And then at some point, my family was camping in Arkansas, and I'm from Texas, Arkansas is not far away. And we went to a drive-in theater, and saw a movie called The Legend of Boggy Creek that dramatized sightings of a Sasquatch-like creature in southern Arkansas.
I actually got the Blu-ray version of it sitting up here. They made a Blu-ray edition of it. I had to scoop it for myself.
Right, yeah. And then now I've kind of become involved with all of that. But at the time I saw that, and that was like really awesome because it was like a scary thing and it was a movie and it happened not very far from where I lived, as opposed to whatever Scotland or Pacific Northwest. Those seemed so far away, you know, Patterson Gimlin film and stuff. But that seemed like, well, that's in some woods way over there, you know. Now I'm talking about something in my own woods. And so ever since then, I was just fascinated with it. And that sort of ended up in wanting to write a book on the legend of Boggy Creek, to know what was the true story behind the true story and behind the movie. And that's kind of what got me, you know, where I am now.
Man, that movie too, I'm sure it's one of those things that it probably got a whole generation into doing documentary style, because it wasn't the typical like monster feature. They almost did it like step-by-step encounter experience style. So, I mean, just off of that, of course, it just sparks a bunch of interest and kind of brings it more into the real world. And then once you actually realize that a lot of the sightings and stuff they used in that were actual sightings, I mean, that just opens the doorway, man.
Yeah, I mean, it was very innovative, and it seemed so real the way they reenacted it, and they used people in many cases that actually had the sightings or were in their family. You know, these were authentic accents and everything, even if they were overdubbed. It just seems so real. And, you know, I mean, when I do events or anything I do, people come up to me and say, oh, thousands of people, that scared me to death. I love that movie. I saw it, or my dad showed it to me, or whatever it is. So many people have seen that. And so that's really cool because, you know, fast forward in life, you know, I've written the books and done documentaries, and I've interviewed people, and I've been to the sites and where the movie was filmed and hang out there in Falk a lot. And it's very surreal. You know, the newest HD version of the Blu-ray, I have a commentary track on there as a bonus. So just to have some weird, so surreal to be involved, you know what I mean? To so many years later, from the kid who watched it to trying to bring a scholarly, true story to it.
Oh yeah, that's like almost like getting to dub over or be part of like one of your childhood dreams, like especially like that movie specifically too, man. Because honestly, it feels like a lot of like your documentary, the way you kind of develop your storytelling and stuff. It's kind of like a mix between, you of course want to give the facts and everything, but you also tell it from a good perspective of storytelling. And I mean, it seems like the styles just kind of mesh and fit perfectly.
Absolutely. I mean, I drew a lot of influence. You know, from Legend of Boggy Creek, and then early writers like Lauren Coleman and John Green, who documented sightings of, you know, anomalous creatures. But I mean, I like to tell that story and put a setting to it, just like in the Boggy, you know, Legend of Boggy Creek. So I do draw a lot of influence in the way I tell and document these stories.
I always like to do a thing on the show where, you know, we'll take kind of like the local stories and just kind of retell them so that they're just in another medium. So for anybody that may not be familiar with like the Boggy Creek sighting, if you want to give them a little bit of the background on it, I'm sure they'd appreciate it.
So basically, we're talking about a place called Falk, Arkansas. It's a very small town. Back in the 1970s, it was, you know, 500 people lived there, and that's how small it was. And it's in southwest Arkansas, just close to the border of Texas and Louisiana. It's very swampy down there, very wooded, lowland hardwood habitat, very remote areas, even still today, because you can't develop a lot of that. In the Sulphur River bottoms, people started to inhabit that area in the late 1800s. And then going along, people began to see what they would identify as some strange animal. Of course, they didn't have a concept of Bigfoot. They would say it looked like a gorilla or an ape, or it looked like a man, but it was covered in hair and it walked upright. And this was all just sort of local knowledge or hearsay. People didn't say much about it. And it wasn't until the spring of 1971, in which a family moved to Falk, and over this course of several evenings, something was stalking around this home they were living in. It was kind of in the woods. It was close to Boggy Creek, and it was just an old frame, sort of ranch-style home, and something would creak around on the porch. And they finally got a glimpse at it and realized, you know, this wasn't a normal animal. It was some kind of hairy thing standing upright. And on one evening, it reached into the window, an open window, and they saw this hairy hand. And then they, you know, eventually started trying to shoot it with a shotgun, and it would run away. And ended up one evening they had shot at it, and 3 guys went down and tried to see if they could find the body or any evidence of it being hit. And this guy Bobby Ford that was living there, he went back up to the house, and in that process, something ran out and attacked him, and he fought with this thing, and he barely escaped and nearly jumped through the front door. They ended up taking him to the Texarkana hospital. Texarkana is the closest major city, and you try to tell the doctor what happened in the ER. Well, he was attacked by a big hairy monster in Fouke. And that's how the whole thing eventually got out, because the doctor called somebody at the news, and by the next day it was already this like crazy circus in Fouke with the authorities down there hunting for this thing and interested people. And then it was printed in the Texarkana Gazette newspaper, which brought this crazy story, these people being attacked. And that was followed up with other residents seeing a ape-like creature run across roads and in and around this little boggy creek that feeds into the Sulphur River. And then as people began to interview people, they're like, well, this isn't the first time. We've had other encounters. We just, the news never knew about it. So then you realize there was a lot of encounters in the 1960s, going back in the 50s and the 40s and further back. And that inspired the would-be director, Charles B. Pierce, who lived in Texarkana. He was reading this stuff in the newspaper thinking, oh, man, this is amazing. And his first inclination was to make a documentary, but it kind of morphed into this sort of docudrama horror film, which was perfect. And that came out in 1972 and then went into wide release in 73 around the country, drive-ins, theaters, and later on television. So tons of people saw it back in the 1970s, and guys like myself and others, many others that are, in the Bigfoot field will cite that movie as a big influence. And so as an adult, then it's like, okay, this is based on real sightings, but what is the story? And I began to go up there and spend years interviewing, investigating, going in those woods. And that I wrote my first book, The Beast of Boggy Creek, and have since written other books. But that's how I got involved. And of course, once I started interviewing, I realized there's more sightings that were in the movie, and there's been sightings ever since. This thing has just continued to go, and the news just didn't carry the stories anymore.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. And we are back, so let's hop right in. Do you think that it's all specifically the same one, or do you think it's rather that it's like a location where there's like a tribe or something that's staying? Because obviously the sightings go for a decent amount of years, so I mean, maybe it could be one in there, but I almost have the impression that it's probably multiples that people are seeing. It's just maybe during like back in the 70s where everybody was describing it the same way, maybe it was just one that people were seeing in a specific area, and then when everything started stretching out, then maybe it's multiples, but...
Yeah, I think logically, I mean, if given some suppositions that if this is sort of a biological creature of any sort, it's been way too long. I dated the first sighting back to around 1908, and then there's been sightings this year. So the chances of that being one individual is quite low, not to mention people have reported different hair colors, different heights, variations like that, where even back in those times, there was a few like discrepancies on what people saw, and it kind of lent the possibility of there was multiple of these creatures. So I think like any Bigfoot, or especially in these southern areas, there's got to be definitely more than one. And people will try to dismiss it. Oh, that's my cousin. He was wearing a suit and whatever. I'm like, man, your cousin's like 120 years old and he's crazy because he goes up under tree stands where there's hunters and he's been shot at. So I don't think so. There's just too much to it and too many credible sightings to just simply dismiss it as just one anomaly,
I mean, it seems like, at least to me, when there's like a little concentration of sightings, I've been kind of curious if it's a matter of once the males get to a certain age, if they kind of get pushed out of the nest and they have to try to cohabitate into like their own new area. And so of course there's going to be an up spike of people seeing them as they're like crossing roads or trying to move out to a new area. But I was thinking maybe that could have been what the start of that was. But then once one established, now you're seeing the continuous family of that original sighting that you were seeing. So maybe it started as one and then it became a new tribe area after a male squatch, found a new area to start a new tribe or family in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that would make sense. Those sort of, when you see that with in other animals of the animal kingdom, the way things go with males, and in order to propagate, they got to move on or move over here, and so there's some movement and changes. And I interviewed one lady that she had an amazing sighting back in 2014, right along the Sulphur River, where a lot of sightings have happened. And she was driving up there on the county road at 10 a.m. in the morning and realized she forgot something and stopped and turned her car around. And when she did, there was something hairy and upright standing in the middle of the road. And she said, first I thought it's a person, it's a kid in a costume. And she said, as I just stood there looking at it, and it was just looking at me as if it was just sort of caught off guard. She said, I could tell this wasn't a person. This was like an animal thing. And she said it stood there for a few moments and looked at her and then turned and ran very quickly back into this wood line where it had come out of. It was a field across from there. Very credible woman, very a bit shaken up by all this. But the point here is that she told me, she said, the only thing I heard about the Fouke monster and Bigfoot, she said, this thing was maybe 5 foot tall. She said, I thought they were bigger. I said, well, ma'am, that this could be a younger one. I mean, they don't just pop out at 7 feet tall or whatever. I said, there could be a number of these things. And I don't think I helped the lady very much because she lives on the Sulphur River. And now not only she see one, she realizes that was the baby. But I mean, that's what it was. But yeah, so that fits what you're saying. It's like you've got tribes and you've got males growing to adults, and that's why you would have differences in height.
See, that's usually too where I think that a lot of the sightings end up being the younger males, is because when people are like deep into the woods, you end up hearing these encounters where they're around like 10 foot tall. But a lot of like the road sightings are usually between like 5 to 8 feet tall. So I'm almost kind of curious if it's the younger males or even younger females that just aren't as experienced on how to traverse through the woods. So they end up just getting caught here and there. Because most people, when they see them, they say it feels like a complete accident. Like they'll catch them completely off guard. And the Sasquatch is just as surprised as they are, and then they just end up taking off in different directions. So, if it's an older male, female, I guess, you think they'd be a little bit more experienced on where not to go specifically, because you think you'd learn quick that roads usually bring cars, so probably not a good place to try to cross.
You're right. Yeah, maybe a learning curve there, and yeah, they're just caught off guard. And I very much thought that's what happened with this situation with this lady. And that's when we're lucky enough to see them, or, if you see one deeper in the woods, it definitely could be the more reclusive and possibly the adults, and then they would be larger.
See, the hard part is you don't really quite know where the intelligence factor is. So you don't necessarily know how to look at these things. I mean, you can look at animalistic qualities, even with like humans, that you'll notice that obviously people congregate together, just certain things like that. But when it comes to Sasquatch, it's like a lot of the time you want to try to view them as an ape, so you put these ape behaviors on them. But then there's also some really weird off encounters where they seem like they're more intelligent than like the typical ape, be it if they're not necessarily more intelligent than us, but maybe on an equal level, and we just kind of develop differently. It just kind of makes it hard to fully try to understand their behavior when you don't really know what bar to try to place it on.
Right, for sure. Yeah, I mean, logically, they seem like they would be of above average intelligence, for most creatures, because they've managed to stay elusive and survive in smaller numbers. So, but yeah, that's kind of the unknowns, and a bit of this, a bit scary is we don't know the intelligence level of these things. So when you cross one, you're not quite sure what it can and will do. I mean, we just don't know the answers of that.
And just out of curiosity, I mean, you said that you explored the area and everything when you were writing your book. Did you ever end up finding anything in that area, be it, you know, an actual sighting or any decent, solid trace evidence there?
Over the years, I've found some pretty good tracks. I mean, I see all kinds of things there, but there's been some tracks where I believe this, you know, this is probably from the creature. I can rule out everything else, and that's been over. You know, I've been going down there for whatever, 15, 16 some odd years, frequently. So yeah, a lot of things, of course, heard wood knocks, something that had howled at us. We were canoeing back on Mercer Bayou, me and another guy, at midnight when you do things like that, I guess. And something was howling out of the woods multiple times, and then apparently followed us back down the bayou towards where we were camped, and then was all of a sudden across the bayou channel howling. That was pretty spooky and very strange. And then I've had a couple of sightings. One of them, I can't say 100%. It was a situation where I was on my way to interview a woman who had captured some really good howls on audio and sounded like an active area, and place where I know there's been more recent sightings. And I had stopped off at the bayou to look at the water level, and I was just looking across there, and I see this huge, like reddish looking thing. I'm going to say walk, but between some open areas, and just walk right in a diagonal back there. And I couldn't see enough of it from that vantage point to say that it was the creature. But the thing is, and I couldn't go after it because that bayou channel's when I say bayou, I mean, a lot of it's soggy ground, but this is like a channel, and there's alligators all in it, and we didn't have a boat. But the thing is, I had been up in the town at a place called the Monster Mart, where people gather. It's like a store restaurant thing. We have a little museum there. And a local had told me that he had seen what he believed was the creature a few weeks earlier. And he said to him, it looked like an orangutan. He said it was reddish, and he saw it run across the road. And lo and behold, then I saw that. But the better sighting actually occurred just this year, believe it or not. And this was on April 25th. And I had gone up there for an event, but I went early, and there's a longer story to this, but I had found some hog skulls and that had been placed up near this lake. And I was back there, myself and my girlfriend and another researcher, and I was looking for a so-called boneyard where somebody had said they had found a bunch of discarded hog bones and deer bones, which I thought was strange because hunters, there's a lot of hogs in there. Feral hogs is a big problem, and people will kill those things and throw them. But typically hunters don't kill deer and throw those into a pile. So I thought that was interesting. But we were hiking up there for quite some time along this huge swampy lake, and it eventually kind of runs into the Sulphur River. But we were hiking. It was later in the evening, and my girlfriend and the other researcher were standing probably 20 yards behind me. I was up ahead. I saw a game trail that I just went up very quietly. And all of a sudden I hear like footsteps, like in the leaves walking. And I look up, and about not even like 30 yards away, I see one leg, I see another leg, and then I see a full figure walk out from, it's swampy, there's thick parts and trees, and it's rugged back there. So I kind of see it step out from a thick area and walk 3 or 4 steps, and then went off down a little down towards an embankment and into some cover. And my first thought was like that lady. I thought, when you see that, you think there's a person back here, because, you know, you see something walking but you immediately realize they're not wearing clothes. It's just uniformly black. It was very dark, like very shadowy. And it just walked right across there. And at that point, I could have run after it, or I thought the better was to get their attention and try to get everybody to sort of pursue it, which is what I did, and which took me a bit of time to get their attention or make them realize I'd seen something. And then we all methodically went looking for it, to which whatever it was had just went into stealth mode and was simply gone. Which, if it was a human, there's nowhere to go. I mean, you would have to just hide, I guess. But it was, I would say, 7 feet tall, and I only saw it for a few seconds, so I didn't get a very, very good detailed look, and I, couldn't get my phone out in time. It was just that fast, boom. But we searched and looked and never found any trace of it, but I definitely saw it. So it was a crazy experience.
We will be right back after this brief commercial break, so stay tuned. And we are back, so let's hop right in. Well, I guess this is probably a pretty good spot to ask, and I always like to ask anybody that's a Sasquatch researcher this one. What do you think Sasquatch is exactly? I know, especially with the phenomenon, the way that it's kind of popularized the past few years, there's just so many different opinions on it. But it's coming from somebody that's actually out in the field, actually researching this, like, what do you think these things are?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I would, from being into this as a kid, I mean, I just always approached it like a hunter. That's what I was raised as. It's it's a biological something, a undiscovered species of ape that, exists in small numbers throughout the country. And that's the simple answer. And that's more of the romantic view of it. It's like, we could actually find this. But, over in the years of research and interviewing people, you got all manners of just bizarre stuff that you have to account for. And it could be anything, really. I mean, there's all sorts of paranormal answers, and people come up always and tell me they're aliens. A lady schooled me at an event recently and told me exactly what they were. And I'm like, okay, well, that's as good as any, but I don't know how you know that. But, for me, I just kind of like to keep it simple, and that's the best explanation I can say. If not something that's closer to us, like, a hominid that's an offshoot of our ancestors in some way that sort of remained, survived, but in small numbers that just decided to lay low and to, it didn't develop. And that could be possible, which would give it more intelligence and things like that. But biological things is the way I like to think of it, but I don't discount any other theory or possibility because I simply don't have the answers either.
See, it's one of those things that I kind of go back and forth in my opinion, depending on how many different responses I get to that kind of question and stuff. But I think I'm one of the people that's a firm believer that a lot of the stuff that people are believing is paranormal or supernatural about Sasquatch might actually be natural abilities. It's just something we don't understand yet, because there's a lot of animals in nature that they're only one specific animal that has this ability. And if you're not familiar with that, then it's some kind of weird magic, like, chameleons being able to change colors, for example, or, like amphibians being able to grow back limbs. But, if this thing has like abilities such as like infrasound, that people are looking at it like it's something supernatural, like the woods go completely silent, it may not be that necessarily. It's just another ability that this thing has developed in order to live in the conditions that it does, and people coming from the outside that have no understanding, again, they just assume that it's something supernatural or paranormal.
Yeah, that perfectly said. Yeah, I mean, I agree that people underestimate the abilities of animals, known animals, and nature is not an accident of design. A tiger doesn't have stripes just to make it look good in the zoo. I mean, that helps conceal it. That's for a purpose. animals have ultrasonic abilities, and look at octopus, and like you say, chameleons. There's a lot of stuff that's, biological creatures that are proven can do that is just very magical and seemingly supernatural. So it could absolutely be something we don't yet understand that they can do, which helps them stay elusive and would appear just like anything else over human history that we don't understand. First, it's magic, it's scary, it's, this and that, and then science gets its mind around it, and then we understand it, and it becomes ordinary. But there could be unordinary things that we still don't know, just like you said.
I mean, even for the sake of them disappearing too, I mean, when it comes to like a lot of these like predator animals in the wild, it's like you don't see them unless they're actually on top of you. Even if they have bright, colorful patterns like you were mentioning at the zoo, when they're actually in nature, it's complete camouflage. And one thing with Sasquatch that I've wondered is that a lot of people say that they disappear behind trees, or they'll go into a bundle of trees and just completely disappear. I'm kind of curious if, most people see the dark silhouette as it's moving, but once this thing's sitting stationary, if it has the brownish colored hair, more than likely it's going to be covered in mud, it's going to be covered in moss, all this other stuff. If it's just like they can naturally blend because their fur takes in so much. Because, if you're going around in mud, you're going in and out of water, it's going to start drying up, and then it's going to start cracking. And when it creates that crack pattern on the hair, it's probably going to blend in with trees pretty well, on top of having the brown and the dark behind it. So a lot of people think they disappear, but I'm almost kind of curious if they literally are just standing still behind a tree and they just blend in.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, here's a good example. Yesterday, I was outside, and I saw this little frog near the driveway, and it got on a log, and it's just your average little frog. And my girlfriend came out. I said, "Hey, I found this little frog. He's over here." And she said, "Where?" I said, "He's right there." And I mean, she's 4 feet from it, looking right at that log. It blended in so good. I mean, it looked like bark. And finally, she's like, "Oh my God, there he is right there," just like literally right there. I mean, this was nature at its best. That thing, if you put that frog, even if it was bigger, into the woods somewhere, and if it doesn't move, you'd never see it. You'd have to just run right into it. And I did some survival training with Marines once, and I learned a lot from that. And those Marines could literally just hide right in front of you. They were well trained, and I'm like, "How did you do that?" He said, "We know what we're doing. We break up our form and we don't move." He said, "Movement catches your eye, but when you sit still, you glance across there, we blend right in." I'm like, yeah. And so you get that perspective of what you're saying, like how this stuff it could be right in front of you and just blend in, just like when we pursued whatever I saw. I mean, there's a lot of ground there, and there's only so much we can look at and walk. It could have just hunkered down over here and just blended right into all that boggy peat and logs and trees. We could have just walked right past it, and if I didn't step on it, then we didn't see it.
And I mean, it seems like a lot of the time these things will go off into boggy areas. And if you bring in like the intelligence factor, assumably they know most people aren't going to go step into those areas. So, if these things are 6 to 8 to 10 feet tall, if they're standing in the bog like 1.5 feet, it's not really affecting them, but no person's actually going to go out there and stand there. So they just take a couple splashes into the water, stand still, and nobody can see them. And it seems like a lot of the time when people actually go back and review their footage, they won't catch anything. But then when they actually go back and look, then they'll catch eyes, they'll catch this, they'll catch that. And a lot of the time it'll be like right in front of them on the trail. So, I mean, like the only reason you're able to see that later on is because of most of the time the eye shine using like night vision and stuff like that on the camera. But if you weren't using that and there wasn't some type of reflection back, they could be standing right there and they could be in a bunch of footage and we just never actually realize that they're there because they blend so well.
Right. Yeah. Then that's what nature does. So, whether we want to call it natural or supernatural or whatever it is, it can certainly be something that's explainable, that would certainly lend thought to be in something paranormal, which is seemingly what is not normal right now. But yeah, it could have any sort of abilities that they don't have to be from outer space. You know, they're very much of a terrestrial description. I mean, not that we're not from outer space, I suppose, ancient aliens, but you know what I mean? There's a whole tangents, but they're very much of almost of our own image. You know, they stand upright like us. They have eyes that, you know, some hunter will say it looked too human. I didn't want to shoot it. It wasn't a human, but it just had that look to it. So, you know, it so much seems like something that would and could exist here, and it certainly similar to great apes and similar to humans in a way. So it is a blend of those things. Seemingly doesn't seem like, you know, it powers a spacecraft and comes here. Maybe, you know, like gray aliens. Sasquatch just seems so much of nature, you know.
And on the fact of bringing up the gray aliens too, I know that you don't just research into Bigfoot, but you also do a bunch of different cryptozoology type stuff. One thing I always like to do on the show is find something that somebody doesn't get to talk about very often as far as where the research has gone. So is there anything that you've researched in your time of researching that you haven't gotten to talk to that much that you'd like to dive into?
Well, there's certainly a lot of other cryptids. And I mean, you know, while I love Bigfoot and Boggy Creek, and that's sort of the, you know, what got me into this, I've since, you know, gotten to research a lot of other cases. I wrote a book on the Bishopville lizard man, which is a reptilian humanoid that was seen in and around a small town in South Carolina back in the late 80s. And that was one of those cases, sort of like Boggy Creek, where it got a lot of headlines and a bunch of people saw stuff and the town freaked out, and, you know, a lot to it. But since then, you know, I've got a lot of other really spooky reports of these sort of reptilian type cryptids, creatures that have the ability to walk upright. And one of these came to me from, I was doing I have a podcast called Monstro Bizarro, where just my voice and I narrate these cases. And I was doing one on this creature that was seen in a small town in Texas. And I put out an ad in a paper there asking if anybody had remembered some of these stories. And so one guy contacted me, and it wasn't even about that, but he said he was once fishing on the Brazos River, which is kind of a river that runs right down the center of Texas. And I'm familiar with that. I've canoed down the Brazos. We used to hunt off the Brazos. It's kind of in central Texas, so it's not the most heavily forested, wooded area of Texas. You know, it's kind of a cowboy landscape in a way. And anyway, he said it was late evening, and they were there fishing, and they heard something splashing in the water. And he said, you know, what the heck, you know, somebody's walking down here. They were kind of remote. And he said, this, all of a sudden they see this thing come into view and shined a light on it. And it was an upright, he said it looked kind of alligator-like. It was standing on two legs. It was walking towards them on two legs, and it was like 7 feet tall. And it had a, you know, protruded jaw with teeth and looked like a lizard or alligator thing. And he said that we just, of course, just threw down our fishing rods and ran for our truck, which was parked way up on this embankment. And they took off. And he said, I can't tell you what it was. I can tell you we saw it 100%. It was walking upright on two legs, and it scared the, you know, what out of them. But those are really anomalous, kind of spooky encounters. Like there's just no frame of reference for that. You know, it's just, what the heck is it? That's like a very credible witness.
That's one of those things too that's like multifaceted, because when people hear reptilians, they think of all the like conspiracy theories that involve like the reptilians controlling the government and stuff. But then on the other side of it, you have all these like weird one-off reptilian like encounters, and it's definitely something that's fascinated me for a while, because I've dug a lot into like the cave research and all these like underground cave type beings, and it seems like this is something that pops up all the time, are these reptilian like beings. And usually the ones that people encounter, they seem a lot more like animalistic than anything, where I'm kind of curious if these are something that typically would stay underground and maybe they come out for food and they just don't have much involvement with people, so they kind of freak out when they actually interact and see people, or if it's a matter of, it seems like more often than not with these things, they're seen completely on accident, and they're usually around caves, sometimes around water, and assumably the part for water might be the fact of, again, maybe they're looking for easier to catch food such as fish, because assumably with like that type of mouth, it's probably easier to catch stuff in the water than it would be to catch stuff on land. And I mean, maybe that's part of the reason why they're coming out, is because there's maybe less areas underground where they're able to collect bigger food, and as these things have maybe developed over the years and gotten bigger, they're now requiring bigger food, so now there's more sightings of these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that does get into all sorts of speculation, and the reptilian thing kind of crosses over into subterranean dwelling race of things and extraterrestrials and so forth. But, in a lot of these, and the ones that I've fielded, I guess, almost just seem like a creature from the Black Lagoon type thing. I mean, there's sort of just prehistoric situation where you've got a reptile type animal, but it's developed enough to where it can walk on two legs, which is, makes it infinitely more scary, because we walk on two legs. You don't, So yeah, I'm always fascinated by those, and some other ones. There was I don't know if you know the Thetis lake monster.
I was about to bring that one up when you mentioned the creature from the Black Lagoon, because that's basically how the kids described it.
Yeah, that's kind of a fun. There's kind of a fun one from the 70s where some kids saw kind of a creature from the Black Lagoon that supposedly ran up out of Thetis Lake in British Columbia. But there's been a few other reports there, some other strange things. And I once talked to a guy who said he was there back in, was the 2000s, in the 2000s, and he was one of these guys that just goes and fishes everywhere, fishes lakes and rivers. That's just what he does. And he said he was out at Thetis Lake because he heard the fishing was good, and he's fishing, and it was pretty good, and it was getting really dark, starting to get dusk, and getting towards dark. And he's like, man, I gotta get back up to my truck. He said there's no one else out there, everybody gone. And he said he got up and got in his truck, and he kind of heard something moving in the bushes and saw something over there. And he's like, man, this is weird. There's no other cars out here. Why would somebody be over there? Maybe it's, some animal. And he said that kind of spooked him. And then he gets in his car and starting it up, and he looks in the rear view mirror, or the passenger mirror, one of those, and he sees this thing coming towards the car, like a reptilian looking thing, sort of like the kids described that Thetis lake monster. And of course he puts that in drive and races off. And he said when he got home, he found this like slimy scratch where the thing tried to grab the car. But he said he was telling the story at work, at his job, and he said some girl was like, that's the Thetis lake monster. And he's like, what is that? He had never heard of it. He said when she told me that and got on the internet and showed that report, he was like, oh my God. But he was a very credible witness, and something came up out of those woods and chased him. I don't know. It was pretty cool.
So it's funny too, with the original sighting, there was the two first boys that saw it, and they described it as like the creature from the Black Lagoon. The second group, they said that it was a hoax. And then after that, there was some neighbor that came out and said that his tegu lizard got out. And at least from like my descriptions of like what a tegu lizard is, and working in the reptile community for a couple years at least, I've never seen a tegu get the size of a person, and especially not get up and walk on 2 feet. And especially the continuation of sightings that are happening in this area. I know a lot of people still like to say, oh, it was a hoax, but definitely not a tegu. So just because the second person hoaxed it doesn't mean the first person hoaxed it. Like, it was already talked about in the news, so of course the people are gonna make jokes about it. Of course we're gonna go and make jokes about it. You have to go off the first sighting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't throw the whole thing out because somebody does a hoax, because a lot of these cases are a mix of things. But yeah, the tegu lizard thing is just preposterous. It is not, that is not it. In either of these cases. So, but yeah, that's a good one, and one of those ones where I wish there was more sightings. It's just sort of like that's got a few. Whereas one reason I wrote a book on the Bishopville lizard man is because there was a lot of sightings, and it kind of went on, and there was a sheriff that investigated all that, and I went down there and got all those police files. There was tons of police files on that case, so it had a lot of substance. Whereas the Thetis lake monster has some really cool ones, but not a lot. But I love those because there's just a really wild cryptid, like that stands out in its own way, from some of the other ones, and just sort of becomes this sort of legendary cryptid, even though it only had a few sightings,
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. And we are back, so let's hop right in. But then it's interesting when you start seeing it pop up in other places too, because it seems like there's somewhat of a split between the reptilian thing that, like I said, sometimes they're seen in water, sometimes they're seen near caves or completely dry land. And I'm kind of curious if it's one, the same type of creature, or two, if it's some type of differentiation where there's one that's more aquatic and then one that's not necessarily aquatic. And like the lizard man from Skateboard Swamp, my co-host and I on Bizarre Encounters did a deep dive into that one a while ago. And one of the things that he'd brought up, and actually since you've dived through all the police paperwork, maybe you can confirm this. There were some witnesses that were saying that it almost kind of looked a little bit like Sasquatch, but with dried mud in its hair. I don't know if that was something that just kind of got spread through the internet or if there was some legitimacy to it, but I've always kind of wondered of the possibility if the whole lizard man of Skateboard Swamp could have possibly been a Sasquatch, but with just dried hair that people were kind of confusing as scales. Or if maybe both things were happening in the area. That's also definitely a possibility too.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was a good explanation. It's harder to explain a reptilian humanoid than it is a Sasquatch. Sasquatch seems to make a little more sense. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. And I go into that in my book on why it could simply be a Sasquatch covered in algae or mud or have a skin condition. Look at a bear with mange and other effects. But as far as people reporting and saying it looked like Sasquatch, I actually have the police documents from a family that had a sighting in 1991, right there, right by Skateboard Swamp, in which 3 of them distinctly saw what they described as a brownish hairy creature come up and lunge at the car. They said, in one or two of them say, it looked like a Sasquatch. And the sheriff at the time, Liston Truesdale, which investigated all that stuff at that time, I went and stayed with him for a week and got access to all that stuff. And when I was writing the book, and so I'm looking, he had those people come into the police station and separated them and said, "You write down what you saw," which is great police work. I mean, this isn't interviewing these people later. This was literally a few days later. And you can look at them and it's like, they're very credible, consistent, and that's what they said. So yeah, I mean, there's a number of explanations which could be proposed to explain it. But what I always say is people were seeing something, and they were seeing something that they couldn't quite explain, whether it was a Sasquatch or a reptilian humanoid. Something strange was lurking in that swamp.
Did you, by chance, ever figure out if any of like the footprints were actually confirmed? Because of course, like when it comes to the 3-toed ones, you have that one guy who, spent 60 years walking on a beach and just putting footprints and stuff out. So, you kind of have to look for something like for Sasquatch, like the mid-tarsal break. But I know people claim that there was like the 3-toed footprints. Was there any like actual full confirmation on that? Or was that more so just something that kind of got spread around just through the internet?
Specifically to the lizard man?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the police in 1988, during the height of when people were reporting it, they got a call. Some kids came into the station around 2 a.m. and said they saw a big big thing run across the road, and they thought it was a lizard man. Then some lady calls and said she's hearing these really scary howls down by Skateboard Swamp. So the deputies went down there, and they were driving. It was a dirt road at the time that went back down. These people lived literally down on the swamp, and they went down there. They didn't see anything, and when they came back, all of a sudden they see footprints that were going across the road, and they got out and looked at them, and there were these huge 3-toed tracks, and there was a bunch of them, and went off into the woods, and they were too spooked to follow them. But the next day, Sheriff Truesdale and all those guys came down there, and they cast several of those tracks, and they're on display. You can see them at a museum in Bishopville. They're still there. The conclusion about those tracks, and myself and several colleagues, those things are faked. I mean, the short of it is, we're looking at another situation like Thetis, where all these people are seeing lizard man and all this stuff's going on, and the police are looking. Well, some jokers made these tracks. I mean, they just don't look like real. So it's an interesting part of the story, and I mean, they literally had the wherewithal to cast them, which is great, because most police investigations would just be lapping it off. But yeah, those are real tracks, and you can look at it. There's a picture in my book, and you can kind of just go, eh. It was nice. It was nice work, but it just doesn't seem plausible.
See, that's the hard part with some of the small town stuff, is because it's like, one, it could be people completely joking just because they're building up and they just think it's funny. But on the other side, too, it's like with these small towns, sometimes people, I feel like, will stage this stuff in order to try to bring in like tourist dollars and stuff. So it's like, it's out of a cause that's supposed to help their town, but out of the same side of it, the serious researchers, like, it kind of throws off a lot of stuff. It's almost like the people that'll post like fake pictures of Sasquatch and everything. Like, I know a lot of people just, see it as, oh, it's just fun research. But on the other side of it, there's most of us that are trying to get to like the root of it. And when you fake this stuff, even if it is hopefully trying to help your town or help your small business, like, it kind of ruins it for everybody, because now, you look back at these footprints, and just because the footprints are faked, the sightings may not have been faked, but a lot of people would just look at the footprints and go, oh, it must have just been, people just joking around,
Yeah, that's an unfortunate thing. And one of my colleagues, who's quite extremely well known in the field, we were talking about it. He's like, oh, that whole thing was fake, those footprints. I'm like, yeah, but just because the footprints were, I get it, that doesn't help. But I literally was down there. I spent a week with that sheriff. This is a professional lawman with FBI training, who said, I don't know what it was. And I was trying to find the answers, but he was like, I can tell you, I know the people who saw this, and this isn't a joke. It's not a hoax. These people were scared, and they saw something strange. So, yeah, it doesn't help. It, like you and I care about the subject. We have some integrity, and we're trying to figure it out. A lot of people don't care. They think it's stupid, and those are the people that will post stuff on the internet that ends up making it hard, because it seems like every time I get a question from somebody, it's like, no, that's not the good stuff. Look over here.
I mean, so when it comes to like the lizard man stuff too, I feel like that's one of those things that you lose a lot of people just right off of talking about it. Like, Sasquatch is getting to a point where I feel like more people are prone to actually want to believe that there's actually something that exists out there. But when you hear lizard man or reptilian man or any of that kind of stuff, I feel like most people just kind of throw it out anyways, where even like some of the serious Sasquatch researchers or serious cryptid researchers, even sometimes just off of the wording, they toss stuff out, like the dogman phenomenon. For a while, like, most people weren't taking that seriously in cryptoteeology, because the closest thing it was associated with was werewolves. But once people started having these really aggressive encounters where when people are retelling their story, like, they were horrified to tell these things, that's when it kind of started bringing some validity back into it. So, maybe it'll just take somewhat of a little upspike of a lizard man encounter where, people that are researching this stuff will actually see the fear in somebody's eye, and then they'll get them to actually fully understand and want to investigate this, such as like what you're talking about where with the lizard man escape or swamp kind of hitting a special spot for you.
Yeah. I mean, undoubtedly, some of these, seem more plausible than others, and stuff. But to me, it's not really. I'm fascinated with it just simply because, like, I mean, some of these cases like transform a whole entire town, and it just a frenzy happens, and all this crazy stuff, like people seeing monsters in modern times. Just the story itself is interesting to me, whether we can prove it or don't prove it. It's like, it's not really a matter of whether people saw something, and it caused, some media circus, and it scared people and all sorts of had effect on people. There's a human interest and a sociological interest to the phenomenon of people seeing this, just like we see with Sasquatch, how popular it's become. Like, everybody loves Sasquatch. Well, if you told somebody, 30 years ago you saw Sasquatch or Bigfoot, people think you're totally nuts. It's interesting how all these things happen and the stories behind them. So for me, and that's one thing I love about my books, it's not really I'm out to prove anything. I just bring forth all the evidence into one thing. And I can tell you there's all kinds of wrong stuff on the internet. By going to the sources, going to original articles and stuff, you can piece together all this stuff that happened in sequence, that this built a case of something that is now, people go, oh yeah, the lizard man. Yeah, I heard of it. They've heard of it. But what was the story, and with Dogman, it's the story of that is sort of being built right now because, 10 years ago, I'd never heard anybody saying they'd seen a Dogman. Nobody came up and said any of that. You had Beast of Bray Road and a few other stuff and a few weird cases like the Viter werewolf from Texas, the Lawton werewolf, and the Defiance werewolf of Ohio. That was it. Now, every time I go somewhere, I get, 10 Dogman reports. So it's like either, man, those things are propagating and running wild, or people are comfortable to tell it, or whatever reason. Those things are now the story. It's like this phenomenon of people seeing werewolves, in 2024.
See, I'm from Michigan, so I dive into like the Michigan Dogman stuff, and most people didn't come out with their encounters until Steve Cook originally wrote that song and played it on the radio, and then people started coming out with it. Right. So I think that a lot of what happens with the Dogman stuff is that this has been going on for years, but people didn't know what to relate it to. But the closest thing they could relate it to, but they'd still keep it to themselves, was Sasquatch. And I think that a lot of these violent encounters that we heard about from the past with Sasquatch, there's a good possibility that they may have just been Dogmen, and people just didn't have a way to differentiate the two at the time. They just saw a big humanoid hairy thing out in the woods, and you have these encounters where they're just kind of peeking around trees, and then the other ones where they're bluff charging and running up on you. And I think that that's where it is now, is that we have a way to divide the two, where we're looking at the snouted face. And even within Sasquatch, I mean, there are certain ones that have the more snouted face, but now with the research, we have a way to divide this stuff. So I think that's why a lot more is coming out, on top of the fact that people actually have a place to be able to talk about this stuff with, because, up until podcasts and the internet, people were writing books and everything, but I felt like that was almost untouchable for a lot of people, where they would read, this book about all these encounters and everything, but they didn't feel like they could connect with the person that wrote that book to tell their story. And now that, the internet's around and people can read a book and go, oh, I can find this guy on social media, it's a lot easier for people to spread their stories and tell their encounters when there's people that want to hear it. Because think about how many super interesting encounters may have happened in the past that just weren't ever told to the right people, and they just went to the grave with the person as, they passed away, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. The platform to tell these things is out there now, and people, the more people tell them, the more you realize, well, I guess I'm not crazy, because there's there's all these other episodes where people are saying they'd seen something similar. So yeah, it's people are more comfortable. So, and that's the thing. The reports aren't just happening yesterday. They didn't happen today or yesterday. They could be, well, when I was a kid, that was 30 years ago, or, my grandfather was just, 50 years ago. So you start documenting all this stuff that wasn't documented, even in the Fouke Monster. I mean, I literally got a report 2 days ago from a guy who he bought the movie from somewhere, and the person there said, "Have you ever heard of Lyle Blackburn?" He's like, "No." He said, "Well, they were like big fans, and they said you got to read his books." And he did the commentary track and all this stuff, and he's like, "Wow." So he emailed me and said, "I've never really told anybody this story, but back in 1971, right when it was all happening, he told me this sighting he and his friends had." So I literally just learned of that one just, now, but it's that, it's been off the record, I guess, all this time. So yeah, so much more is coming forth now because he could connect with me, boom, in an email.
I mean, even just like people calling in police reports too, and not wanting to sound ridiculous on phone calls. Like you hear about all of these old Sasquatch call-ins where they'll have something knocking at their windows, and they'll call in saying like they believed it was like a big African man, like they would say back in the 50s and stuff. So even digging into like older police reports, if you actually know the trademarks of what you're looking for, I'm curious how much you'll find just looking into just weird peeping Tom reports, for example.
Yeah, for sure. When you look at it with a different lens, there could be other possibilities. You never know. The person just described it as best they could. Oh, well, it looked like an African American, had dark skin, or it looked like a gorilla because they had never heard of Bigfoot. You just describe it as best they could with what they had at the time. But of course now people are more familiar. So if they see a Bigfoot, they're probably going to be able to describe it better or be willing to say. Whether the police respond, I don't know, but
they'll just got to call the right people. You got to call the cryptid hunters, not the police. We'll call the police, but then call the cryptid hunters.
Call 1-800 Blackburn. I'll see what I can do.
I'll show up with my team. Give me 48 hours. Got to get the A-team together.
Right. And people think that too. Like they'll email me, I've got this thing. Can you come out here? Could you come investigate? I'm like, where are you at? Like Wisconsin. I'm like, I'm in Texas, man. I'm going to have to refer you to somebody a little more local until I get that, that unnamed millionaire that can fund all my investigations,
We will be right back after this brief commercial break, so stay tuned. Hey guys, I know nobody really wants to listen to ad breaks on podcasts, so instead of actually listening to those, why don't you go and check out some of the sponsors and affiliate links for the show instead. Number one, you guys can go and check out IKNOWSQUATCH for all of your squatchy gear needs, or you guys can check out Cryptoteeology for all of your wearable cryptid favorites, or you guys can check out Snarly Yow for a fantastic natural line of beard oil, beard balm, beard shampoo, and body wash, all with an enticing woodsy aroma of smoky cedar with a hint of mint. And he also puts on a lot of fantastic events around the West Virginia area. So if you guys are in that area, make sure you guys go and check it out and see what kind of events he's putting on, because he definitely brings in an awesome group of people. And you guys can go and check out Big Ape Threads for all of their Bigfoot and cryptid related designs. And going into the affiliate links, you guys can always go and check out the newest sponsor to the show, Oregon-ite, specializing in scale model pyramid replicas, EMF protection devices, and much more. And if you guys find any pieces that you guys want to scoop for yourself, you guys can use code OMM for 10% off at checkout. And to all the paranormal investigators out there, you guys can go and check out the Chattergeist. It is the all-in-one paranormal investigating device. My absolute favorite. I use it every single time I go out. And if you guys have any technical questions about it, you guys can always go and hit up Barry over there in Dimension Devices on Instagram. He's the guy that programmed and developed it, so he'll be able to answer any of your guys' technical questions for it. And if you use the affiliate link, you guys will receive 10% off at checkout. And just a heads up, the company is based in the UK, so when you check it out on the website, it will be in pounds. But when you guys use PayPal, it will convert over. So don't think that you guys can't scoop one just because you don't live in the UK. And don't forget to check out the affiliate link for Sticker Mule to receive a $10 credit towards your first purchase. Over there, you can get a bunch of stickers printed, t-shirts, posters, all that kind of stuff. So if you guys are another podcast and you guys are looking for good quality stuff in order to print your logos on, Sticker Mule is definitely the place for you. And more information on all of those, of course, is available down in the show description. Let's quickly run through some commercials and get back into the show. And we are back, so let's hop right in. And kind of diving into Texas, too. And I want to make sure we got time to dive into your new book you were mentioning and be able to dive into your music a little bit, too. But just because you're from Texas, obviously everybody's talking about the whole, like, Dogman Texas Triangle and everything. Have you been able to investigate any of those, or do you take in any of those encounters as far as as far as Texas goes? Like, do you think that there's as much of a dog man phenomenon happening in Texas as people are kind of leading off that there is?
Well, some of those I'm familiar with. Of course, the classic ones for sure, and some of the ongoing or more recent ones are people I know. And of course, Aaron Dees has written a book for Small Town Monsters on that, and has done a dive into that. And a friend of mine, Josh Turner, who does a Paranormal Roundtable show, he's seen a dog man and has a lot of reports, and a lot of those are coming out here in Texas that kind of haven't been documented. So I think the phenomenon was, I guess, going on where not as many of us realized that there was so many sightings. I hardly heard of any. Nobody was telling them to me, but more recently, yeah, I get more of that, and I'm connected with others who are like specifically researching that. So, all I can say is there's definitely been some great dogman cases in Texas, and one of the oldest dogman related, if you will, legends is known as the Converse werewolf. That dates back to the 1800s in South Texas, where it's sort of a story that doesn't, it could be hearsay, but it does describe, a werewolf-like creature killing this young hunter. So that's one of the oldest, that you can sort of put a basis on, and that's from Texas. So, yeah, I think there's something going on here, and Aaron's done some good work to sort of, make a triangle out of it, or sort of, generalize where the sightings are happening. Even though obviously I got one from El Paso, and I got one from East Texas, and those are, a good 12 hours apart, but definitely a concentration in kind of central Texas.
It seems like a lot of the Sasquatch researchers are coming out now with having experiences. One of which that I had on the show recently was Rod Nichols from Bear County Bigfoot, and he's from down in Texas. And I think he actually said his story was in Aaron Deese's book, and he was talking about when he was just out with the family and stuff like that, and essentially got like paced out by what he believed were dogmen down in Texas. I don't know how far Bear County is from you, but it seems like it's a wide array that it happens throughout that entire area.
Yeah. I know Rod very well. He's in San Antonio, and I'm in Fort Worth, Dallas, so we're about 5 hours distance. But Bear County is basically the same area as the old Converse werewolf story. So that's sort of like the hinge point of where it started in Texas as far as old stories, and his experience being more recent. So something going on for sure.
See, even with these old werewolf stories, I think it's kind of like we were talking about earlier. It's just a matter of trying to put words on something to understand it, where I think a lot of this werewolf stuff, originally, going back to the stories, I think people were seeing these dogman-like beings, and they were assuming that a human was transforming into these things just because of the fact that they had the humanoid shape. And, storytelling through the years, it's like fishing tales that new pieces start getting added. So then later on, you have this idea that everybody thinks that humans are shape-shifting into werewolves, and that's what you think a werewolf is. And then you hear a story like that one from like the late 1800s, and, most people nowadays would go back and say, oh, werewolf, it's just folklore. But a lot of these old stories, it's like you don't hear about anybody actually watching this thing transform from a human into a werewolf. So I think all of these old werewolf stories are actually dogman encounters. It's just that you take away the stamina of the folklore aspect of it, that it's actually somebody shape-shifting, and it fits in a lot more with the paradigm of what we're really digging into now.
Right, yeah. I don't know. There's not very many where people describe it changed from a human. So the werewolf tag is just sort of carries a lot of baggage, and implies that, well, is it a person that turned into a werewolf when it doesn't need to be? And of course, down here, just over in Louisiana, we have stories of the Rougarou, which is very much ingrained in Cajun culture, of this sort of werewolf-like boogeyman, and that's, coming from their ancestry of of the people that lived in France had a very, tradition of werewolves, loup-garou, which changed in the language to rougarou. But I mean, you can talk to people down there, and they will tell you that these are very real things, and they've seen them, and they're not Sasquatch, though oftentimes they've been blended. But now we sort of, in cryptozoology at least, paranormal people have categories that we can now kind of put them in the box instead of just, well, I saw a big hairy thing in the woods, must be a Bigfoot,
I'm glad you brought up the rougarou, actually, because at least as far as I go, like I grew up with my grandma telling me stories about Sasquatch because she was Cherokee and everything. But my first introduction into the more obscure cryptids was the rougarou. I was watching something on TV, and I had all of these people that were like, straight bayou folk talking about their experiences seeing these things, and I don't know, it caught my interest so much at the time, just because it was just something a little bit different, and the way that people would tell about these encounters, like it just seemed so real. So it kind of made me dive into it a little bit more, and I'm becoming kind of curious as far as the rougarou goes with Dogman, if it might be one of those things where they might be within the same category but be somewhat different subcategories of each other, like Sasquatch versus like the skunk ape. It seems like the skunk ape is the one that's more geared towards being in like swampy type areas. So I'm kind of curious if there's like the Dogman, and then there's what we're calling rougarou, which is basically the same animal, but one's a little bit more adapt to live in these like swampy type areas.
Yeah, I mean, could be. I mean, the environments can be quite different across where you can map out all these encounters. So I mean, even if it's started as the same group of things, there's going to be some adaptations depending on where they live and what they need to do, and that's natural differences in things that develop over long periods of time. So hard to say if they're any different. I mean, most of it is just sort of like your general description of a wolf-like thing that walks on two legs. And of course, the rougarou comes with all sorts of explanations, for as to how, they did very much believe that people turned into rougarous, with their traditions. It could be any number of things, a sinful person or a person who was too greedy. It could be a curse. There was all this supernatural stuff attached to rougarou, as opposed to just it's out there in the woods. But that doesn't mean that there is any attachment. That's just simply how people try to explain this stuff. And again, you don't have a lot of people saying, I saw a guy turn into one of these. It's just, well, they're out there, and here's how that happens, or whatever explanations people want to have in their own cultural perception,
I definitely think that that's something that's seen across with a lot of these creatures. And not to go too far into this rabbit hole, of course, because I want to get into your new book, but like for Wendigos, for example, most people think of them as this like deer-headed, half decaying type creature, but the natives described it more as these like lanky zombie-like creatures that were more human-like than like this weird animal-like version of them. And of course, like there's a plethora of stories with the natives talking about the giants and how they had to fight the giants and everything like that. So they usually talked about seeing the Wendigos during the winter, and they were just decrepit and looked like they were starving. I'm kind of curious if there were these giants walking around at the time, which assumably there's more than enough evidence that there was some type of giant human-like being around at the time, if they may have been putting the connotation of, oh, if you eat another person, you're going to turn into one of these things, when they may have actually just been like these giant beings that were starved out during the winter, and then they just started creating stories based around these things.
Right. Yeah. You there's no way to tell chicken or the egg, it's like, did they see these things and then build explanations as to what they were, or did they have this idea of like a moral, don't get out there and trapped in the snow and eat people because you'll turn into this because this is evil, and then the internet comes into play, because all of a sudden you have all these images of the Wendigo with with deer antlers. Well, that's not even there's not at all how they were described. They looks cool and it makes it look awesome, but 99% of the descriptions had nothing to do with that. It was like you said, it was an emaciated sort of even whitish giant of a person, sort of came out of that like trapped in the snow cannibalism kind of thing, but they weren't deer people or anything. So there's always just this amalgamation of stuff that perception or internet can put in there. But when you go back to the source, which would be, the Native American stories, is to look at what they describe them as,
See, and when it comes to these things too, and how they're described now, I'm kind of curious if like the phenomenon is kind of split, because when you look into like pill crawlers and rakes, they seem to fit that image of what the natives describe Wendigos to talk about. So now I've created this new subcategory for these creatures that were already described, thinking that the Wendigos are these deer-like beings, and then you're just splitting off into more phenomenon when you could probably take a lot of the pill crawler and rake stuff and line it up the Wendigo stuff, and it probably would fit, because it's, as far as I've seen, pretty much almost exactly how they describe these things.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much. And it's just sort of like how you can have any Bigfoot, generally you got Bigfoot, you got skunk apes, Ohio grassman, Fouke monster, Boggy Creek monster, Sasquatch, Bigfoot. Are they really different, or are they just names that people have applied to generally the same type of thing, with the habitat being different and some adaptations? But I think it's cool just in terms of being able to digest these and have fun with it. It's cool. That's what I like about Southern Bigfoot. There's 20 different names for it in Texas, and they're all sort of specific and almost give it this sort of personality, when ultimately they're just another hairy biped. But it's cool that they like Rougarou. It lets us categorize and discuss things rather than it just being this just sort of homogenous bunch of stuff that we can't explain.
True. Gives people a standard of comparison to actually be able to talk about their experience and encounters and kind of know somewhat which way to start going down. And before we start running out of time, of course, I want to get into your new work that you mentioned before we started. So why don't you let them know a little bit about your new work that you're working on?
So it's funny because this kind of goes with what we're talking about. I've written a book on the Lake Worth monster, and there's something I've covered a little bit in my Texas Bigfoot book and mentioned it otherwise. But this is something a case from 1969 that happened really close to where I live. I was born in Fort Worth, and Lake Worth is north of Fort Worth. And back in the summer of 1969, this all started when three couples were parked out near Lake Worth. And back in those days, it was just sort of like a lover's lane hangout, dirt roads, and people parked down there and all this sort of stuff. When all of a sudden, some large animal creature jumped onto one of the cars and tried to pull a woman out of it. And her husband was down fishing. He saw this and ran up and sort of tussled with this thing before he was able to jump in the car and drive off. And then all the cars that were parked down there saw this, and they all left, went to a cafe and called the Fort Worth police, who responded. And this individual described it something of an amalgamation of like a hairy goat man, scaly, fishy creature. Just a really weird description. That's what appeared in the newspaper the next day on July 10th, 1969. But this set off this just totally crazy frenzy of people assembling down there on Lake Worth with sightings. And the very next night, 40 people witnessed what they believed to be the creature run up on this ridge and throw a tire and run off into the woods. And people were hunting at it, shooting at it. The police officers saw the thing too. And a woman came in and wrote a book back then, and self-published book in 1969, which has kind of helped make this thing give some longevity and keep it alive. But over the years, I've learned a whole lot of information and come across a whole lot of maps and photos and things that relate to this case, which went on, and ultimately people began to describe it as a white-colored Bigfoot, whereas the first witness described it as a goat man, if you will, which now we're in another category of cryptids. But people also described it as a white-haired Bigfoot or something in between. But there was a lot of credible sightings. There was even a photo taken on November 19th, 1969, which people, if you Google Lake Worth Monster, you'll see the photo. This is literally one of the very earliest photos of a hairy, upright cryptid. I mean, you had some Loch Ness Monster photos, and of course, Patterson-Gimlin film in 67. 1969 from Texas, we have one of the most notable, earliest alleged photos of a cryptid. So I go into all that and how all this happened, and it's local to me. I've spoken at the library in Lake Worth. They do a Lake Worth Monster Bash every 5 years at this nature center, which still engulfs Lake Worth. It's still wooded out there. And so people have asked me a long time, you should write a book on the Lake Worth Monster. So finally I did just that. And it's an interesting book with this phenomenon of just people seeing strange things and the ensuing media circus and everything that went on with it. So that it's going to be out. I just posted the cover literally today. So when this airs, people will already see it. It should be available in September.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. And we are back. So let's hop right in. Just out of curiosity, when was like the last sighting seen for this thing? Like, is it still something that's still kind of active here and there, or is it just that point in time and it was just never seen again?
Mostly confined to into the 70s. There were still things going on. And there's a longer history when I started researching other sightings of Bigfoot, especially light-colored Bigfoots in that general area, which is Dallas-Fort Worth, along the Trinity River. And the Trinity River is a major river that runs through Texas. I found stuff dating back to the 30s, and I have sighting reports from the 50s, and then they kind of go up really credibly through the 70s. But then you don't have anything going on really in that area today because it is so developed. Like people ask me, like, have you seen anything or say? I mean, it's just the Dallas-Fort Worth area is just one huge giant city, and it's kind of engulfed all that. So there's really not a place where you're gonna see have sightings like this anymore. So that's confined. However, along the Trinity River, down from there where it's still less developed and in spots, I offer a lot of other encounters there to suggest that perhaps whatever this thing was moving along the Trinity River, because, I mean, that's sort of a commonality to a lot of Bigfoot cases and Bigfoot sightings, whether they're just seen near water or you can just dot on the map right down wooded creeks and rivers where there's numerous sightings. So if something was there, I think it was definitely could be passing through at the time. And there was a place called Greer Island where people said it existed. So it was literally kind of isolated on this island. There's a land bridge to it now, but at the time you couldn't get to Greer Island unless you swam or took a boat. So that was sort of the theory as to where it was staying out of sight. So interesting stuff.
I mean, especially too, if it's a white Sasquatch, I don't know if it works the same with that as it would with other animals, like where if they reproduce, if they're going to start causing that white within their young, or if it's one of those things that it's like a suppressed genetic that only pops out sometimes. Because, if the sightings are going from the 30s to the 70s, that could have been the lifetime of that one specific Sasquatch, if that is what this thing is. But there could still obviously be a lot more in this area. It's just a matter of people were hyper-focusing on that one, because if you're completely white, it's probably a lot harder to blend in with the trees than it would be all the other ones that are more of the brownish color. So it may have just been that this one was catching people's eyes and that was the reports, but it's still going on. It's just not that specific one anymore.
Right, because you still do get reports of white Bigfoot, and I take a chapter in there where I say, well, look, somebody reading this like a white, they're like a white Bigfoot. Come on, or isn't that a Yeti? Well, Yetis aren't actually white. That's Hollywood, but where I kind of go into and say there actually are, it's not the most common color of a Sasquatch, but there are others, and I've had, over the years, I've gotten some really interesting reports in and around even this area, my area, where people have seen light-colored, white-colored, gray, Bigfoot-like creatures. So yeah, it's definitely not a total exception. But if, like you say, if there was a white one, well, it's probably going to get cited even more, especially when, people are alerted to it because people were just going out there trying to see it. So naturally, you have a lot of sightings.
And I mean, even on the other side with animals too, it's like you got to expect that you see albinoism in almost everything, even humans. You see it in apes and everything. So if Sasquatch does carry some of the same genetics as us, they're going to have something where they're going to be albino or they're going to have a completely black complexion because it's going to work both ways the same way as any other animal does. So, I mean, again, if you take it into the possibility that these things are going to exist, white Sasquatch isn't that far off if you actually add biology into the factor of Sasquatch.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's albinoism in other animals. There's only been one gorilla that's said to have it or presumed to have it, but other animals have it. So yeah, it's not. In other words, it's not far fetched that you could have a white one.
I mean, even specifically in people, you talk about the genetic side of Sasquatch, and they say that, the male side is unknown DNA, but the other side is female human DNA. So, I mean, if you see albinoism in people, it's still carried within that human genetic because we're a little bit different than other apes. So, I mean, it's obviously not super common in people, but it's bound to happen at some point. And, if that is the human gene, you have to take into the same rules as you would with humans in that aspect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So, all these things you can find reasoning and explanations for to explain what seems like an anomaly. And of course, you also pile onto that the sort of goat man folklore, which almost a lot of people think of the Lake Worth monster as a goat man, based kind of on that one sighting, which the first sighting was great. The person who had that sighting in 1969 is deceased, but I, for the first time, talked to his son, who knows well the story and who saw a drawing his dad did of it. And none of this has ever been published before, which kind of really is intriguing to hear that perspective. So you get this whole goat man thing and the Sasquatch thing, and but I discuss all those things in there because it's interesting with just the whole goat man lore and bridges and goat men, and how does that relate to cryptozoology? Is that urban legend or is this cryptids, and what were people seeing at Lake Worth? It's a really unique and interesting case.
I said I'm really looking forward to when you release that book because I haven't actually dug too much into that myself. So I'm kind of curious what information you put together. And, just like you said, a lot of this time is going to be the first time actually being published. So definitely recommend to all the listeners out there to make sure you guys mark your calendar. Go and check out Lyle Blackburn's next book. And before we start wrapping up towards the end of the show, too, I know a lot of people have you come on, and obviously you're the cryptozoology guy. But on the other side, too, you're also a musician. So I want to kind of get into that a little bit on where did music kind of come into the mix with like cryptozoology and monsters and everything, and what kind of inspires you to write your music, and like what style is your music for anybody that isn't familiar with the fact that you're a musician?
Right. Well, I mean, I've been playing in semi-professional to professional bands since I was in high school. So I've always made a living at music and writing. And so I've been in various bands over the years, and toured all over the world and all of that. My most recent band is called Ghoul Town. It's kind of like a crossroads between Johnny Cash and Rob Zombie. We've been around quite a long time, recorded 9 albums, and that's I've done all of this sort of concurrently. I mean, cryptozoology unto itself is not a career that one should seek if you want money.
Seems like even podcasting, you got to be doing two things at once. You got to have like T-shirts or this or that. Or
yeah. It's like, even though I see occasionally online people saying that I do it for the money, I'm like,
where's all this money at?
Put me in on that, man. Ultimately, I write books, and that helps. But even books, but music and books. So, that's basically, music has been my career path for a long time. And Ghoultown's done well. We don't tour so much. I've really scaled back on all that. I've done a lot of touring in my life, even though I travel a lot to do events and research. It's just me and not an entourage of trailers and buses and whatever. But Ghoultown, it's our music is kind of, it's very Texan, dark Western, if you will. It's something that's very unique. It's hard to describe. I mean, but you can find our music anywhere on iTunes and YouTube and, Pandora or wherever. And, people can just hear it or watch the videos. But, it's been something that's been quite successful. We got a new, we have a label in Europe now that's been repressing all of our albums on vinyl or reissuing. So I'm in the process always of reissuing or getting the files and remastering and doing all that. So we have a new one coming out, I believe this fall. Vinyl pressing is like a crazy thing. It takes so long to get stuff pressed. I guess every band's trying to do it now, but
it's super cool though, because not very many people can say that they're like newer bands that get pressed on vinyl. So I mean, all on its own, that's just its own cool thing, just to collect them even for yourself.
Yeah, it's cool just to have them. I mean, and they sell out like within a day or two. Like that's it, because I mean, it's just a certain run, and that they sell out. So, So the band thing with Ghoultown is sort of a concurrent with doing the research and writing books.
And just out of curiosity, for anybody that may not have looked up any of the songs from your band, do you have any personal favorites that you'd recommend that people go and check out if they're going to check out any?
Well, everybody, we have a song called Drink with the Living Dead that is incredibly popular, I guess. If people will meet me on the street or whatever, and they'll be like, I love your band, I love that song, and I go, Drink the Living Dead, right? Yes. It's hugely popular. I mean, it has 25 million views on the video or something. So I guess I recommend that simply because it's a popular song for us, called Drink with the Living Dead, and it's usually what YouTube probably serves up first if you type in Ghoultown. But we wrote a song and did a video with Elvira, Mistress of the Dark.
Oh, that's awesome.
People know. I was asked by her to write a song, and we ended up going to Hollywood and shooting a video. Now that was in 2010. But we have this really cool, it's called Mistress of the Dark, and there's like an extended video where our band and her are involved in the video. It's really cool. That was obviously a very cool thing as a horror fan and horror kid. I mean, to have Elvira ask you to write a song is pretty cool. So, that's good stuff. I don't really have any, like, people ask if we're going to do like a Cryptid album or crossover. And honestly, we're like this dark Western theme, and that was sort of already there. And I've tried to kind of work cryptids in there, but it almost sounds hokey. So it just is its own thing. But we have a song called Werewolves on Wheels that is quite popular. So maybe I'll do a follow-up called, Dog Man on Bikes. I don't know.
You got to do something about Sasquatch in Texas or something, and try not to make it sound too hokey. You got to do something where it kind of draws people in, and you got that like creepy horror vibe to it. But I definitely think you guys could pull it off, man. Like, got to put it on the bucket list. You got to at least throw Sasquatch into a line in a song or something at some point.
Yeah, I know. I definitely got to do it. So
we will be right back after this brief commercial break. So stay tuned. And we are back. So let's hop right in. And before we wrap up the show, man, I always like to do words of wisdom from the guests to the listeners. So if there's any words of wisdom you could bestow on the listeners, be it the musicians, people that are inspiring cryptozoologists, what might it be?
I guess I would say along these themes is just pursue what you enjoy and work hard at it, and it will pay off. I think I recall my parents telling me that hunting monsters and being a musician were both off the list of career choices, yet I made it work. But, it does take hard work like you don't just start a podcast and then that's what you do. It's like, but if you do it long enough and do it well, you will become successful. So that's a good life advice for everyone, is just follow your passions. And if you're reasonably talented, you sometimes have to work hard and work a long time, but it will pay off in your perseverance.
Hey, I always say life's about experiences, and specifically with all of this cryptid research and everything, like you said, it may not pay all this ridiculous amount of money, but you end up having these experiences that you wouldn't trade for the world, getting to interact with certain people, getting to go out to these different locations and everything. And like you were saying about not giving up on stuff, I mean, I've heard this from a lot of people that you got to keep working at stuff, because the day you give up, the day that it might end up working out for you is tomorrow. But if you gave up, then you'll never know that. And if you're passionate about it and it's something you enjoy, you can't let yourself give up on it. Even if it doesn't end up ever doing anything super crazy one day, as long as you enjoyed the experience, you had fun doing it, at the end of the day, that's all that matters. And everything else will kind of fall into place as it's supposed to, because I'm one of those people that believes that everything kind of happens for a reason. And as long as you enjoy the journey, it doesn't matter where the destination is, because you had all of those experiences that you wouldn't trade for the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great advice. And I mean, that's like the theme of cryptid pursuit. You may never prove, I may never prove that the Boggy Creek monster is real, but I enjoy the journey. It's fun, and it's not about the end goal of proof. It's about enjoying the research and the camaraderie of talking to guys like you and just in having that experience, and it's fun. And so you have to always have fun with this, and not take it too serious, and that's a better way to live.
Oh yeah, the people that are going to believe, that want to believe, are going to believe. The people that don't are never going to believe. It doesn't matter what piece of proof you put in front of them. Like, you just have to do it for yourself, and if you can prove to yourself one day, I mean, that's all you can really do. And if it pushes other people down the path where maybe it connects some of their research, then more power to them. But at the end of the day, you're never going to prove to anybody but yourself, no matter how great of research or photographic evidence you ever find, because there's always going to be people that are going to try to tear it apart, even if it's the most perfect picture that's ever been taken of Sasquatch.
Right. You can forget it now. They're just going to say it's AI.
Yeah, ain't that the truth? And for anybody that wanted to come in, pick up a copy of your new book that's coming out, come and check out your music, possibly, report some encounters to you, or get a hold of you for any reason whatsoever, where can everybody come and find you on the internet, and where can everybody come and find your music and your research on the internet?
So, you can check out my website, lyleblackburn.com, and that, has a rundown of all my books and links therein, and even links to Ghoultown. And you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, just search Lyle Blackburn and it should come up. And yeah, you can report a sighting if you email me from my website, because I'm looking for always looking for reports and putting those, filing them away for whatever research reasons. So, but yeah, all my books are available on Amazon. Ghoultown Music can be found on iTunes and YouTube and everywhere else. So just search Lyle Blackburn, and appreciate the support.
And I will make sure I include that link down in the show description so everybody can find it quick and easy. And I appreciate you making the time to come on today, man. Hopefully we can do this again at some point in the future. It was an honor to have you on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you.
If anyone is interested in being a guest on the show to share their experiences or to share their research, or if anybody's interested in having me as a guest on their show, or if you're interested in sponsoring the show or getting a hold of me for any reason whatsoever, you guys can get a hold of me through email, which is increaseofourrealitypodcast@outlook.com, or you guys can get a hold of me through social media. Instagram and Facebook are the ones that I'm the most active on. Or you guys can also go to the link tree and you guys can fill out the submission form, and that will go directly to my email. There is another submission form over there for reporting an encounter, so make sure you guys click on the right one. And while you guys are going and checking out anyways, don't forget to report those encounters to ommencounterreports@outlook.com, or use that submission form on the link tree. And everything that I mentioned today is all available in the link tree, which is available down in the show description. And with that, hope you guys enjoyed the conversation, and I'll catch you on the next one. Have a good night, everybody.
I was sitting in the thirsty devil, one sheet hung to the wind, when the bat-wing doors creaked open and a stranger sauntered in. He moved his head from side to side and glared with a sunken eye. I heard the spin of a rusty spur as he shook off the dreary night. He lowered his hat and checked his gun and headed toward the bar. He walked on up beside me, I knew he'd traveled far. In a voice as thick as mud, he looked at the keep and said, "One shot of whiskey for myself, and one for my new friend." The patrons whispered hushed hello, they seemed to be afraid. As at the ghost had stood right up and walked out of its grave. His face was shallow and dirty, his skin like leather hide. Sure spoke like any man, but something wasn't right. So I twisted on my stool and turned to him and said, "Thanks, sir, but just the same, I'm chasing worms instead." He growled and shoved the drink my way, his eyes as cold as death. I picked a drink, should knock him back, held straw against my hand.
When 6 to midnight and the phony hands of death die, you better drink your drink and shut your mouth. If you draw against his head, you can never win.
Go ahead.
Drink with the living dead.
Who the hell do you think you are? My patience growing thin, but swallow hard I had to do when the story he began. His lips curled back and words came forth, starting up the tale. And every face inside that bar, it turned a shade of pale. My name is Stanton Creed, and I died 3 years before I shot a man to steal his drink. At least that's what they hung me for. Now I'm cursed to walk the earth and challenge every night a man to match me drink for drink, or by the bullet die.
When 6 to midnight and the phony hands of death die, you better drink your drink and shut your mouth. If you draw against his head, you can never win.
Go ahead.
Drink with the living dead.
No, wait a minute, mister. No one makes me a fool. I push a shot of whiskey back on over towards school. I love a drink like any man, but that's a losing game. To drink or draw against the dead would only be insane. Stanton Creed, he tipped his hat and laughed a wicked laugh. You see, the Lord curse my soul for killing that poor man. There ain't no choice, so you must try to match me shot for shot. If you win, then you'll go free, and I can finally rot.
When 6 to midnight and the phony hands of death die, you better drink your drink and shut your mouth. If you draw against his head, you can never win.
Go ahead.
Drink with the living dead.
The bar hog nodded slowly, and I knew that I was screwed. If I chose to duel the dead, then I would surely lose. So I took the glass and threw the shot into my throat. I would match him drink for drink, no matter if I choked. Whiskey, tequila, vodka, rum, or gin. There ain't no man that I can't beat, be him live or dead. So into the morning, I matched him ounce for ounce, till Stan Creed fell over and a winner was announced. Now rests in his pine box and I still walk the streets, but I don't forget the night when death had chosen me. There ain't no fancy moral to go with this, I fear, less you aim to kill a man and drink down his last beer. When 6 to midnight in the morning and the death, now you better drink your drink and shut your